a lot of the work I do, while I focus on disability, really it affects everyone and can make a really big difference in everyone's life. So keep that in mind moving forward, that we all will have different needs at some point. So let's not, think about disability as, this separate thing that's not affecting me. If it doesn't affect you already, it most likely will at some point in your life, or someone you love.
You're listening to Jasva Talks, the podcast where we spill the coffee, not the tea.
And we're your hosts, On
and Moose. In this episode, we're spotlighting Armineh Babikian. She is Armenian-American, an occupational therapist, and an award-winning disability rights advocate, researcher, and founder of her NGO, Therapists for Armenia, which we'll get into in a little bit.
We met Armineh last summer when our previous guest, Ani Khudaverdian, who you might remember from our episode 4, introduced us to Armineh, and since then we've been admiring her work and her activism for people with disability in Armenia.
This time we met Armineh in July, and once again she came with suitcases filled to the brim with equipment and material for a 3D printing project that we're going to get into in this episode. It's really cool, by the way. But actually she also gave us some really good advice for our own chronic pain and herniated discs that we've been dealing with. So by the way, if we've been missing in action, that's why. We've had some health problems, so it's made it a bit difficult to film and be super active with this project, and it's also taken a financial toll. As you know, it's just me and Son behind this project doing all the filming, the editing, music, sound. So that's why we've opened a Buy Me a Coffee page where if you've enjoyed our little coffee spilling community, you can donate there, and it will be super encouraging for us to continue our work and keep making Jasva Talks possible.
Any amount that you can contribute is going to be really, really helpful for us. You can find our Buy Me a Coffee page link in the description.
Anyway, back to the episode. Here's Armineh.
Hi everyone, I'm Armineh Babikian, and I'm an occupational therapist by background. For anyone who's not familiar, occupational therapy is a branch within healthcare and social services under rehabilitation, where we help people who have injuries or disabilities or recovering from surgery to regain skills in daily activities. So the name comes from how you occupy your time. And so that can include getting dressed, brushing your teeth, to more complex activities like using a computer or paying your bills. And I also am the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization called Therapists for Armenia, where we are a multidisciplinary team of occupational, physical, and speech therapy volunteers across US and Canada, and we work to strengthen rehabilitation and disability services in Armenia in partnership with different institutions, clinics, advocacy organizations in Armenia. And I'm also now a researcher doing my PhD at University of Toronto in rehabilitation science and global health. And yeah, my research is very much related actually to my work here in Armenia, looking into rehabilitation policies in Armenia and comparing that with service user experiences to see how rehab development in Armenia can better support the diverse needs of disabled people in Armenia. I've received many awards, honestly, for my work, and it's a really wonderful thing to be recognized. I've received awards from the American Occupational Therapy Association, the World Federation of Occupational Therapy, Columbia University, where I did my master's degree. Most recently, my department, Rehab Science Institute at University of Toronto, I got the Community Service Award. Because many don't know this, the work I do with Therapists for Armenia Armenia and all of our team, it's all volunteer work. It does equate to a full-time job, honestly, with the time and effort. And also, I've received support from several organizations for my studies, like the Babikian Foundation. I'm an Armenian Studies Fellow. And I'll talk also about our upcoming projects that we've received a lot of grants and funding for as well. So, it's just nice to be recognized for this work.
This is the place to, get that recognition too and be proud. So please tell us all your accomplishments. We're really proud of you.
Yeah, you can tell maybe about Azad 3D project.
I've been involved in this sector for 8 years now in Armenia. I come back and forth a lot, but this trip in particular is a new project that we are launching called Azad 3D, which is the first time that we are attempting to use 3D printing to make adaptive equipment in Armenia. Previously, this type of equipment has to be ordered from other countries and brought in, and oftentimes there are barriers to that. Things get stuck at customs, the timing that it takes, the extra expenses related to shipping. And we experienced these barriers, which when we were doing a project 2 years ago to support people displaced from Artsakh, specifically people with disabilities, to support their transition needs to Armenia. And so we worked in collaboration with a few other organizations here in Armenia, but mainly Disability Rights Agenda, which is a disability rights advocacy organization based in Yerevan. And so we had identified all these needs for over 30 recipients, and we tried to order equipment into Armenia, and it got stuck at customs for like 2 months. And then we gave presentations also about different adaptive equipment, which I will also just explain. It can be different tools that can support, again, daily activities. So for example, like an adapted fork or spoon, if people have hand weakness or difficulty moving their fingers, something with a thicker handle or at an angle can be easier for them to use. So these are the types of equipment. They're small items, not huge devices, but it makes a really big difference in someone's life to be able to eat by themselves without support. So these are the types of items that we saw were really missing here in Armenia and were difficult to access for many people. So we developed this new project with Disability Rights Agenda and Armbionics, a company here based in Armenia that does 3D printed prosthetics. I'm doing interviews with people with disabilities, with caregivers, to better identify their needs and see how can the equipment best fit into their lives and be most useful as we are developing the project.
So you brought a bunch of 3D printing materials with you. Have you gotten to print out any of the adaptive equipment yet and test it out?
So that's happening right now, actually. So I brought I don't even know, 30 spools of 3D printing plastic and resin materials with me because, again, it's easier to bring things in a luggage than to ship to Armenia. So Armbionics right now is testing out the design and the functionality of this equipment with their engineers, because with 3D printing, what's great is a lot of the designs are open source, so they're openly available on the internet, but Armbionics is adapting them to their machines and just making changes to make it more functional. So we're going to be testing out 2 items. One of our other partners is the Luce Foundation, which is also a rehabilitation center in Yerevan, and they also have robotics classes. They have a 3D printer themselves. So we're working with them as well to test out some of these items. I think it will be a lengthy process till we get to the final product. And also the appearance makes a difference as well. Disability is already so stigmatized. So how can we make these items look cool and fun and make people want to use them as well.
And then these booklets here are also related to this project, right? And it's specifically about getting dressed and eating.
These booklets are from this project that I had mentioned from 2 years ago to support Artsakh refugees. And so we had identified certain gaps in the equipment needs, and we decided to put together a guidebook for the users of the adaptive equipment to make sure that it's not just, here's your new item, best of luck, but we want to make sure that it's clear how to use it, they use it in a safe way. So these booklets have different items for dressing and feeding with a step-by-step picture and written guide on how to use them. And we really made sure to use plain language so that it's as accessible as possible. And also, again, with Disability Rights Agenda, they help to make sure that the translations are written in a way that's very clear, because some of this language doesn't really exist in Armenian, or it's not commonly used. And so, so these booklets are the first actually in the Armenian language related to adaptive equipment. We're really proud of that.
Congratulations, that's amazing.
And I wanted to ask about therapists for Armenia. I wanted to know what other projects you did recently.
Sure. So we just celebrated our 5 years of Therapists for Armenia. Yeah.
Congrats!
Thanks. Yeah, I'm proud. It was exciting. Honestly, there's a lot that's happened. I often describe us as a small but mighty team. I think one of the main things that we have accomplished is created the first Armenian rehab resource library on our website. It's actually in multiple languages, and it's very extensive. This all started during the Artsakh War in 2020, when the rehab providers in Armenia expressed a need to better understand these complex injuries that they were seeing. And so we hosted webinars, and then we created this resource library, and it's now become like an internationally used library. I just checked today, and we have like over 3,000 users on our resource library from 33 countries. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it's been really cool. And because it's free also to use, you just have to make a free account. And I actually, at our 5-year anniversary, which we held in New York, because I'm originally from New York City, someone came to our event. She's a speech language pathologist who works in New York, originally from Ukraine. And she was saying that, like, she found out about our event because of our resource library from our website, and she was like, thank you so much for these resources. They're so helpful, because especially when it comes to adult rehab, that was the emphasis of the resources, was adult and post-conflict needs. There isn't as much available. There's a lot for children, not as much related to adult rehab. So that's a really great initiative that we continue to expand upon. We've done a lot of humanitarian response as well. In 2023, when there was the gas station explosion in Artsakh, we were the first to send like burn rehab supplies and created these guides for exercises related to burn rehab, which were then used in like a WHO burn guide here in Armenia. So yeah, it's always evolving, but based on the needs and what our partners here identify as areas of support.
How many volunteers you have?
We have about 20 volunteers, and we're across 8 states and now Canada. I live in Canada now as well. So yeah, we are also always growing and looking for new volunteers too, if anyone is interested in supporting. And it doesn't have to necessarily be people within the rehab field. There's always need for fundraising support, marketing support. And so, yeah, if you're interested in volunteering, we are happy to chat and connect.
When was the moment that you realized you need to start this initiative of therapists for Armenia?
Yeah, it started when I did Birthright Armenia, actually, in 2017. I was volunteering as an occupational therapist in the villages with a few different organizations, but mainly Children of Armenia Fund. And at that time, inclusive education was newly beginning, but the implementation was problematic, I will say, because the law was changed, but there wasn't sufficient support provided for educators and school staff on how to be inclusive. So now you have these students in your class with different needs and disabilities. You know, they're physically in the class, but they're not actually participating, or they're just off to the side in the corner because some of the teachers didn't know how to adapt to include them. That was my first introduction into disability and rehab needs in Armenia. And so I started to, I first did a lot of observation to see how things are done here. And I just told them about what occupational therapy is and what it is that I do. And then they came up to me and said, oh, I actually really need help with, with this. We have a child who has difficulty paying attention, or another child, an autistic student, and I'm not sure how to support them. And so I started to get all these requests, and I was working individually with the students, but also with the providers. And so eventually I started to host workshops on like some occupational therapy strategies. And my focus was really also using items that are readily available. And then I these requests just continued to grow. I returned every year after Birthright to still volunteer and support. I brought equipment with me. And then eventually I started to get requests that were beyond my area of expertise, which is intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I started to think like maybe I could find other people who can also help in this way. Like I would imagine there are people out there who would want to, host a workshop as well. And so, I decided to start a network to bridge Armenia with the rest of the world, specifically within rehab and disability sector. And it started as a Facebook group, honestly. And I started to meet some other diasporans also from the States who want to be involved in Armenia, but didn't know how. They weren't familiar with the field here. And I felt like I had more familiarity, so I can really help people connect. But then COVID hit, and so then we were like, well, how do we navigate this? But it actually helped us because I had people in California, I had people in New York, I had people in Armenia, and now we had all these virtual tools to connect us. So that's when the webinars started, and then during the war, the rehab needs really exploded. And also the interest from the diaspora to help really expanded. Our organization grew a lot during that time, but there were a lot of trial and errors to see what is the best way to make this work. I think I'm still always learning and trying to make things better. And my team also, we all are constantly learning from our partners here in Armenia. That's a big emphasis I try to make, is this is a knowledge sharing organization and we're co-learning. And so we'll see where the next 5 years will take us, but I'm excited for it.
What are some needs in Armenia that people with disabilities have, and you identified it through your work?
So that's what my PhD focuses on, the needs of people with disabilities in Armenia within rehabilitation. And people often ask me, like, what kind of disability or who are you, focusing on? And I'm really keeping it broad, actually. So I'm working with parents of children with developmental disabilities, adults with disabilities that can be they were born with a disability or acquired a disability later on, and also soldiers with disabilities or veterans. And it's been really interesting to hear the diverse needs, honestly, of every group. And that's where I think with my research, I'm hoping to really hone in on that and make those recommendations that we can't really have a one-size-fits-all approach because the needs really vary. For the parents, a lot of it was related to education and guidance. They're given these labels at a young age or, these diagnoses, some of them right at birth. So after already such a traumatic and emotional experience of giving birth, then the doctor tells you your child has a disability, but they say it in a way that, oh, I'm so sorry that your child has a disability. So that already sets the tone for the parents and for the health system as well of how they view it as a tragedy, as something just is a terrible thing. But there isn't guidance either on, okay, this is your new reality. What kind of support do you need? Do you know that your child can also become really independent and successful? Or, that's not the reality for everyone, but, how can we support you? How can we support your family? So those conversations are not always happening. So that was a big gap the parents identified as just guidance and education. They said they mostly learn from other parents and they don't know like what services they should look into or what they're eligible for or how to access these. So yeah, I think that would make a really big difference and also to create a more positive disability identity, that difference isn't always bad. And that's something that I hope will change at some point in society, but obviously that's a long ways away. And then with the adults, they were really talking about we are people too, and we are a part of this community, and stop looking at us as less than. And so that also, again, comes to this like social change of accepting disability and not viewing it as something to be ashamed of. A lot of just the participants I had were working. Some of them were living on their own. Some of them are parents. Yeah, seeing people with disabilities as whole people as well. So that was something the adults really focused on. And then the veterans, they spoke so much about mental health as well and the importance of addressing psychological needs and support. And a lot of them have their own struggles with disability too, because if you think about like there are these oftentimes macho men defending the country, and then suddenly their life changes and they are the person that they used to look at as, oh, poor you, and now that's them. And so they're dealing with this new identity, this new reality. So some of them were talking about that, of they felt like it's almost easier for people born with a disability because they are well adapted and adjusted, whereas they now have to make huge changes in their life to live as a disabled person. So that was interesting too, to see how they view each other within the disability community. Or some of them also don't identify as having a disability. So at times I just had to use the language as like rehab service user rather than a person with a disability. It really varied across populations. I'm still analyzing my data. This was all done through focus group discussions, and then I'll be comparing it also with policy here. And I also did my groups in Yerevan, in Gyumri, and Vanadzor, so I'll be comparing as well geographically the different discourses and representations of disability and needs for rehab. But yeah, I'm excited to continue to see what will come of this research and hopefully can make some real changes in the field here to better support disabled people, to shift away from the stigma and the shame, and to have better supports so that people can live the life that they want in the way that they want it.
I know from stories from my family, people with disabilities in Armenia or Georgia, people with mental health issues were just kind of hidden away during the Soviet Union, and I feel, having lived here for some time now, that that's still kind of the treatment of people with disabilities, that they're hidden away. But could you maybe name some of the shame that goes on in Armenian society regarding people with disabilities? Maybe we can name it, challenge it.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Part of my research does look into the contextual factors within Armenia that contribute to these disability discourses. And within the Soviet Union, and it's not specific to the Soviet Union, honestly, this was the way many societies were structured, is that disabled people were put into institutions, separated from society, and thought to be possessed or crazy, or anyway, all different types of labels, and thought to, not be able to contribute to society in ways that they felt were productive, like joining the workforce or being a part of educational institutions. So yeah, within the Soviet Union, that was very much the case as well, where disabled people were put into institutions. There's actually a quote from an article that I'm using in my research that they use the term invalid for disabled people in the Soviet Union, and someone quoted, "There are no invalids in the USSR." And so it was very much like out of sight, out of mind. If we put these people away, it doesn't exist. That way of thinking makes a really huge impact on society. So that's where a lot of this stigma and shame was strengthened and continued for a long time. And even rehab services here in Armenia, the department at the Armenian State Pedagogical University was at the time Department of Defectology. So again, focusing on defects, it's very much a negative perception again of disability. Within a healthcare system or educational system, when people in positions of power are using that type of language, it's going to ripple throughout the rest of the system. And so that's really what happened. Part of it is this biomedical view of disability as something that needs to be treated and cured, like there is a defect with your body and we need to cure it. That type of thinking, honestly, is still quite common in Armenia and globally, but just because my research focuses on Armenia, I can just speak more on that. And then also the religious factor plays a role as well, of viewing disability as a punishment for sin or something that the parents did, and that this was their punishment as a result, is to have a disabled child. That also comes with a lot of shame. And yeah, you do still see that in Armenia, especially in the regions. I think it's more common. It's something that, Soviet Union was 7 decades, so that's a long time to solidify these discourses within society. So it will take generations to change that. I think within Armenia, things are trying to change. Like within policy, they're trying to take a more holistic approach and talk about human rights, that everyone, regardless of disability, gender, ethnicity, have the same rights. But I think the challenge is in the implementation. A lot of this is written on paper, but in practice is still not there. That's why I think with my research, I'm trying to really center the voices of disabled people so that it's not based on assumptions of a policymaker or of a healthcare provider, but from someone with lived experience of disability, lived and living experience.
Speaking of guidebooks that you've created that are first of their kind in Armenia, you also created the Occupational Therapy Guidebook to Inclusion in 2020. Can you tell us a bit about that and what impact it's had so far?
Yeah, so that was a result of my birthright experience where I was leaving back to New York, but I wanted to make sure that, the work I put in didn't just finish after I left, and that I gave resources and supports for people to continue utilizing these occupational therapy approaches. So I started to put together a guidebook. Eventually, I received a grant from Birthright Armenia as well as an alumni. As a result, I created this occupational therapy guidebook to inclusion. The focus is on developmental disabilities, so it explains in very simple language different types of developmental disabilities, about inclusion, different challenges that people may face and how to support them. So if there are cognitive needs or challenges with handwriting, with reading, and it all uses household items to, again, make it as accessible as possible. And it's really a resource for providers, for parents, caregivers, anyone involved, or, disabled people themselves as well, for exercises, positioning in a wheelchair, adaptations to help someone who has visual impairments to be able to read easier. There's quite a lot of information in there, and it was again the first of its kind, specific to occupational therapy approaches in the Armenian language, and I had 1,500 copies with this grant and another grant distributed across Armenia in different educational institutions. So now every region has a assessment center that assesses the needs of students to see what additional supports they need. Every assessment center in Armenia has a copy of my book. Almost every rehab center in Armenia has a copy of my book, and it's all provided for free for them. And it continues to be used and requested, and I have to try to figure out how to print more copies, actually. Because again, I think there's the desire here to better support, but the resources are not always there, whether it's a language barrier or not sure where to start, challenges with training. That's why these types of resources can really make a big difference.
You have really helped me and Sona actually with work from home tips, because we're both suffering with herniated discs at the moment, unfortunately. And I feel like it's such a big problem, especially since COVID, everyone was working from home. We talked a little bit about this, but maybe for the listeners, it would be really valuable to hear from you about some lifestyle changes you've made, you were telling us about, that were really impressive, or ergonomics that people can keep in mind when they're working from home.
Sure. So, a big part of occupational therapy is ergonomics. Actually, the name for occupational therapy in Armenian is ergotherapy. I'm happy to share some tips because I experienced this as well during COVID and having to work from a computer all day and feeling the neck pains and back pains from that. But basically, what's important is if you're seated, it's important to keep a 90-90-90 positioning. So what that means is a 90-degree angle at your ankle, 90-degree angle at your knees, and 90 degrees at your hips as well. And so that will help you sit upright. If your chair is too high, for example, you could put some books on the floor, so then your feet will be at that 90 degree. And then making sure the height of your chair is adjusted, the height of your table is adjusted. So again, similarly, if the table is too low, can put some books to raise your computer up higher. Also making sure that the 90 degrees is hip, knee, ankle, but what about your neck? So your neck should also be upright, and a good way for that is to make sure what you're looking at, if it's a screen or a book, is at eye level. So you're looking straight ahead, because if you're looking down, your neck will move down. If you're looking up, your neck will move up. So making sure that your seating is appropriate and also what you're looking at is at an appropriate level. Now there are so many different ways to make that happen. There's stands for laptops. There's also separate keyboards, separate mouses that you can use so you're not hiking your shoulders. Also, if you need to enlarge your screen so you're not squinting your eyes, there are many accessibility adaptations nowadays that can really make a difference to just make it more comfortable for everyone. So they're minor changes, but it really makes a big difference overall. And also if you can take breaks to stand. There are desks now that can adjust from seated to standing. Standing is also great while working to get that blood flowing and make sure you're not tightening your leg muscles all the time. Just your environment where you spend a lot of time in is important to adjust it so that it's comfortable, and pay attention to your body and those signals that it's giving, because it can really accumulate into a more serious issue down the line.
And walking, staying hydrated.
They say to give your eyes a break and look out the window every so often. Look at greenery is really nice. But also it just reminds me of especially with some of the accessibility changes on technology, on your phone, on your computer. These adaptations were originally created for people with disabilities, but it shows you how accessibility is really universal. And so all of these changes can make a difference in anyone's life, whether it's using a ramp or larger text or bold lines. A lot of the work I do, while I focus on disability, really it affects everyone and can make a really big difference in everyone's life. So keep that in mind moving forward, that we all will have different needs at some point. So let's not, think about disability as, this separate thing that's not affecting me. If it doesn't affect you already, it most likely will at some point in your life, or someone you love.
Thank you so much for this advice. Thank you for the incredible and inspiring work that you're doing. It's been really a pleasure to know you and to have this discussion with you.
Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me to your podcast. This is my first time being on a podcast, so it's exciting for me too. And yeah, thanks to all the listeners. I hope it was interesting. And then if anyone's interested in learning more, Therapists for Armenia has Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can go to our website, therapistforarmenia.org. As I said, we're all volunteers, so any support is much appreciated. And feel free to reach out and connect. I'm happy to chat more and share more about my work and learn from others as well. This really is an effort that, if we all come together, will make the biggest impact.
You can find links to Therapists for Armenia website in the description. Also, we will include the links to online versions of guidelines that were mentioned in this episode.
This episode was supported by our partners at Filia, a feminist fund in Germany. And once again, just as a reminder, if you have been enjoying Jasve Talks so far, we have opened a Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to support us further.
If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Jasve Talks. If you have an idea who we can interview, or if you want to be interviewed yourself, don't hesitate to contact us. That's all for now. Thank you for listening. See you next time!